Before we get into the control lessons, I want to take you on a tour of the physical buttons on the camera, where they're located, and a brief description of what they do. Lens release, we just talked about it. Here is the shutter, probably one of the most important buttons on the camera. This is how you focus and take pictures. We have our autofocus assist light. It illuminates in dark situations, and we can turn that off in the menu. Down here, we have a new switch. It is the autofocus to manual focus switch. Usually, this is found on the lenses, but Canon has moved it to the camera body. We've seen this on other cameras like Fuji's, for example. So what this means is you'll be able to quickly jump to manual focus or to autofocus back and forth by flipping the switch. And the button in the middle of that is our depth of field preview, which can be customized. And I'll show you how to set this up a little bit later. The depth of field preview will stop your aperture blades down to give you a preview of your depth of field in real time. Taking a look at the ports on the left side of the camera as we would hold it, we have these rubber gaskets. Under the top one, we have our microphone port. So if you're going to do any kind of video recording, you need to plug an external microphone. This is where it goes in. Your headphone jack is on the bottom, right here. We have a remote terminal where we can plug in a remote control. We also have HDMI, mini HDMI. You'll notice it's not the bigger plug, it's the smallest one. And we also have our USB-C terminal here on the bottom. One of the questions I'm sure some of you will have is, can you charge the camera with the USB port? Not in the way that you're thinking. You have to purchase a special power adapter, and you have to be using LPE6N or LPE6NH batteries. You cannot use an LPE6 regular battery. The camera has to be turned off, and it has to be that special adapter. Otherwise, it's not going to work, unfortunately. Something else I want to point out, kind of hard to see, right here next to the viewfinder, is called the diopter adjustment. This is for those of us, including myself, who wear corrective eyewear, and we need to adjust the focus of the monitor inside of the camera. And so you rotate this up or down, and you can adjust the focus as you're looking through here. Very useful for those of us who are getting older and slowly losing our vision. On the top of the camera, you'll notice these two dots. These are the microphones. And despite their best effort, they're not going to be great because they also capture vibrations and how you're handling the camera. So for video recording, always use an external microphone. We have this new hot shoe protector. It's this little plastic cover. The hot shoe mount is for your strobes, your speed lights, triggers. You can attach accessories here. You'll notice we have these beautiful pins which tell and communicate the speed light, when to fire, and how much power. Obviously, we'll get into this on the crash course where I do demonstrations with a speed light with a strobe. There's a little symbol over here that it looks like a circle with a line through it. This tells us where the depth of the sensor is. It's often very overlooked, but that's what it is at this point, is where the sensor is mounted. Over here, we have the mode dial. This tells the camera how to behave when we push the shutter button halfway down in terms of exposure control and things of that nature. I'll talk about this in depth later in the video. We have our lock button. We have our power switch. On here to this middle part is for stills. If we turn it to the video camera icon, now we are in the dedicated video mode. So video, stills, off. This guy here, ISO, is our sensor sensitivity. I'll demonstrate this a little later. The red button is start and stop video recording. We have our MFN button, which is our multi-function button. It's going to help us select different options that I will also demonstrate. And this guy here is a very important controller. I like to call it the primary selector because numero uno, our finger, one on the selector, and I will demonstrate this later in the exposure lesson as well. And again, we have the shutter button and we have the lens strap mounts. When we're looking at the back of the camera, we have this new control wheel that has a rotating dial, and it also has a joystick. This dial I like to refer to as the secondary selector. Primary, secondary, for a reason I will demonstrate a little later. Next to it, we have the AF on button, or the back focus button. I'll show you how to set this up in the focusing lesson. Hard to see, we have a small little speaker right here. We have our information button. We have our directional pad, which pushes really in 8 directions, up, down, left, right, and on each of the diagonals. We have a set button, which acts as an enter button would on a keyboard, right? And you'll also notice we have this Q icon in the middle of it. Demonstrate this. We have our playback. You'll notice these are in blue, so playback as well as delete, the garbage can icon. And on the top right hand, we have this little star symbol, which is the exposure lock if you're shooting without a flash. It can also work as the flash exposure lock when we're shooting with a speed light. This button I like to call the cluster button, which will determine our focusing squares and which ones we're using. Kind of hard to see here, but there will also be this little blue magnifying glass on the outside of it. Anything you see in blue is for playback. So when you're playing back images and you push this, this will zoom in and out and allow you to inspect images. And on the top left-hand corner over here, we have the menu button. That's for the deep menu, and there's a lot of information I'll be giving about this later on. Something else I want to point out is that you can push the joystick directly into the camera body, and if you do so center, it will recenter your focusing square. I hope to demonstrate this later as well. I'm going to open the monitor to demonstrate some other things. I need to set the date and time. I will in a moment. I'm going to tap the shutter button to get me into a shooting mode, and I want you to notice this little black rectangle here is that when I move something in front of it, we lose the monitor in the back. This is a power saving feature, which the camera basically, when we lift it to our face, shuts off the monitor and turns on the smaller monitor in the eyepiece. When we lower the camera, this shuts off and we get back to our regular view. And there's different ways we can control this. For example, if we're shooting on a gimbal, for video, and the gimbal's too close to this monitor, we would need to turn this off to see what's being played on the back. This feature is usually in the yellow menu, and I'll demonstrate this a little bit later. This might be a little bit early to be jumping into the menu section, but I want to access my power saving because I don't want this camera to keep getting dim as I'm talking. So I'm just going to turn off the screen dimmer, and viewfinder, it's fine. Auto power off. I'm going to change this to 10. I'm just going to turn this off altogether. So after I've turned these off, it's going to be easier for me to demonstrate these things. Coming back out to the menu, here is the screen finder display feature. If we wanted to shut this stuff off and just have the screen, if we're shooting on a gimbal, this is where it would be. We'll be talking more about the deep menu later on. Something I have not done yet on this camera is set up the date and time. I've kind of skipped it. So you can always adjust your date and time here on the yellow tab on the bottom. It thinks it's January 1st. It's not. Change this. I'm currently in Hawaii, so I'm going to choose the Honolulu time zone. Should be in here. We don't have daylight savings here. It's kind of interesting. Arizona doesn't either. So hit OK. And so now the date and time is set up correctly. I'm going to hit OK. In terms of housekeeping, I want to point out that anytime you change the mode dial, by default, the camera will make these prompts and you can open them and read a little bit. It drives me nuts. So in order to turn those off, you're going to come into the yellow tab, and that's called the mode guide. And I would strongly recommend turning these to disable. And the reason is when you're shooting between modes, you don't want to have to wait. You want to get into the shooting pretty much as fast as possible, right? So that will turn off your mode guide. Something else I want to do is to format the 2 memory cards that I've put in here. They've been backed up. I have 2 copies of all of those images and videos on 2 different hard drives in 2 different places. There's different strategies to this. Maybe you'd have an online copy somewhere on the cloud and another hard drive, but always keep at least 2 copies in safe, secure places. I have many horror stories of people who put it all on one hard drive for years and the hard drive died and they can't get those images back. So now that I've backed those cards up onto 2 sources, I'm going to come into the yellow tab, page 1, format card. Not a lot of information on it. And I'm going to repeat the same for the second one. Again, not a lot of information on here. Now these cards are empty and they're ready to go. Anytime you're in a menu like this and you want to return to shooting, you can just tap the shutter button and it'll jump you out.